So things may feel a little different today. We didn't do a greeting for the first time. And we've got new solar shades on our windows, so it looks different. And that is for all those via the internet who are joining us so that they don't have a glare of the floor, the glare from the pergola, and welcome to all of you that are watching via the internet. We're so grateful to have you, so grateful to have this community. And you may be feeling a little uncomfortable, and that's okay. This week I was feeling a little uncomfortable when I thought about the topic that I had to discuss today. God. Like, whoa. So big. Where do you start? And fortunately, I had an appointment with my spiritual director on Friday. She lives in Dallas, and we talk on the phone once a month. And I was telling her that, I have this voice inside of me that's saying, who are you to talk about this? Who are you to talk about God? Who are you to get up there and claim to know anything? And she, in her wisdom, said, okay, let's set that little girl aside for a moment. So let's put her in the corner for right now, and let's just sit in the silence together over the phone and ask, what is God's voice saying to you right now about this? What is God's voice saying? And so it's a little awkward when you're on the phone and you're sitting in silence because you can't see anybody, and so you want to fill that silence with chatter. And so my mind is going, okay, let's come up with something right away so we don't have to sit here in this uncomfortable silence on the phone. But let's just put that aside. And I sat there. And it wasn't very long. It was just a few moments where I heard very clearly the words very softly, serve me. And I knew that they were true because I started crying. I could feel the truth in those words, serve me. And my spiritual director had said, when you hear something or when you know something, you come up with something, just speak it and let's talk about it. And I said, I heard, serve me, and I'm trying to get through it without crying. And she's like, great, what does that mean to you? What does that mean, serve me? I said, well, it was God. You asked for God to speak to me, so it was God saying, serve me, God. And she said, what does that mean to you? Come into greater awareness of what God is. Come into greater awareness of the God that you are. Come into greater awareness of God in all its shapes and sizes and perspectives, and share that. And be that. And allow yourself to come from that. And that was my instruction for this, serve me. And I could feel the truth in it as I shared that with her, which was beautiful because what we're going to be talking on the next few weeks is we're going to be doing an 8-week talk series on this book, Is Your God Big Enough, You Enough, Big Enough, Close Enough, You Enough, Jesus and the Three Faces of God by Paul Smith. Paul Smith is a minister. He was in a minister serving at a church for 49 years in Kansas City. He has a Southern Baptist background, and he was at a Southern Baptist church called Broadway Baptist Church. And through the years, he evolved his own beliefs and started doing gay marriages in his church, which was very much frowned upon by the Baptist church. And they eventually asked him to leave, not the church, but the church had to lose its Baptist denomination. And so now he was the minister at Broadway Church. They just dropped the Baptist. But he evolved through this process of coming into greater awareness of what God was to him. And he was inspired by Ken Wilber, who wrote The Three Faces of God. Probably many of you are familiar with The Three Faces of God by Ken Wilber, in that we talk about God from the first, second, and third person. So Paul Smith said, fortunately, as he evolved and he changed, his church changed with him. That he didn't lose anybody. That people didn't leave because he was being more inclusive. People didn't leave because he was embracing an integral spirituality. He wrote a book called Integral Spirituality, by the way, which integral, meaning every part is essential. And when we talk about God, every perspective is essential to get to whole, to get to fullness, to get to a full awareness. And it's so hard for our minds to even wrap ourselves around that sometimes. In the very beginning, in the introduction, there's a story that I want to share that he has in the introduction of the book. And there's 5 travelers. And they're all seeking God, and they're all looking for ways to know God. And they all happen to meet at a lodge one night and spend the night in the same lodge. And so they're in the lobby in front of the fireplace, and they introduce themselves to each other. And they realize that they're all seekers. And the first traveler says, I'm spiritual, not religious. And I am seeking the ultimate creator. I'm seeking ultimate reality. And when someone asks me, where is God? He says, it's beyond me. The second traveler said, that's interesting because I see it differently. And I too am seeking God. And when I think about God, I think of somebody as a close friend, just sitting beside me, someone I can talk to and share things with. And she said, when I am asked, where is God? I fold my hands in prayer and say, God is beside me. And the third traveler says, well, that's interesting, both of you, and I too see it differently, because I see God as this presence within me. I see God as my best self coming forth. And so when someone asks me, where is God? I say, God is within me. The fourth traveler looks at the 3 of them and says, well, I'm seeking God too, but since the 3 of you can't decide on anything, I'm just going to say God is nowhere. The 5th traveler says, is silent for a minute. And she looks at all of them and says, I don't see that God is nowhere. I see that all of you are right. That God is someone to reflect about. A spirit to reflect about, not someone. That God is within. That God is close. That all of you are right. And that as we say God is beyond us, God is nowhere. Because we can't define it. And so she says, I think all of you are correct. And it's important that we see God as all of that. It's all of those perspectives. Paul Smith agrees with this way, and the book goes into a lot of detail going forward about these different perspectives of God. Now, I'm using the word God, and if that triggers something for you, you can replace it with spirit, universe, field, energy, life, whatever word works for you. Replace the word God. I'm comfortable using the word God. I wasn't always, but we can transcend that embedded theology that may mean something to us from our childhood, and it can mean something different now. you don't have to use the word God. Although Pew Research did a study in December of 2017 and said that 80%, when asked the question, 80% of the people, do you believe in God? 80% said yes. 20% said no, but of that 20%, half of them said they believe in a power greater than themselves. So that's 90% of people still believe in God, a power, a force, something greater that we cannot explain. And we've evolved to this. Years ago, ancient years, people didn't understand the way the world worked, didn't understand the natural world. And so they would hear the thunder and see lightning and think it was God's being angry. Or they would see the sunshine and the rainfall or the rainbow and think, it's God's are reacting, they're happy with us today. And so the people would start to build communities, and in communities they created certain religious rituals. And over time, things evolved over hundreds of years, hundreds of centuries, into a place where we understand the natural world, but there's hundreds of religions, all thinking that theirs is the one true religion. But we can evolve from this as well. And if you're on a spiritual path, it's good to take in all perspectives, to be aware of all perspectives. Because we can't define God. We can't define spirit. The moment we think we know, or we can define it, or we can put spirit, God, into a set of words, we've limited God. And that which is limitless cannot be limited. And so this integral approach is really important to us on a spiritual path, to be able to experience and learn about and become into greater awareness of all different perspectives of what spirit is, of who spirit is, of how we relate to it. Paul Smith talks about the three faces of God like Ken Wilber did, first, second, and third person, but it comes from his traditional belief in Jesus, in the Trinity, in the way Jesus talked about God. Jesus reflected about God, he related to God, and he rested as God. About 1,600 years ago, the church officials made official this teaching of the Trinity, of Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And that too has evolved to the faces of God, the three perspectives of God, the big enough, close enough, you enough God. But Paul Smith has this love for Jesus' teachings and for Christianity. And it wasn't always that way because, again, he grew up Southern Baptist and then had to give up the Baptist part. But he says, like Jesus, and by the way, we follow the teachings of Jesus in unity. The Bible is our main textbook. We are a Christian approach, or a different approach to Christianity, a practical approach to Christianity, meaning we follow the teachings of Jesus. We don't worship Jesus. Paul Smith says that in his evolution of his faith, his perspectives of God, he said he had to do what Jesus did. You get rid of what doesn't resonate with you. You embrace that which does, and you stay open to anything new. And we can do that too, with our own traditional, wherever we came from traditionally, most of us didn't grow up unity. Most of us came from some other traditional religion. And he says in his introduction that the way to heal that, because we can get triggered from that, the way to heal that is not to just go somewhere else, not to just ignore that and move on to a different center, embrace a different religion. We need to go through it. He says go back to it, to go back to those teachings and then find out what is true for you. And he discovered that he wasn't a fundamental Christian, but he was fundamentally Christian in following the teachings of Jesus. So he talks about the big enough, close enough, you enough God. The big enough, there's a quote from the book. If we cannot reflect about God in big enough ways, then that God will not stand up against other, more attractive but lesser gods in our world. We need a God that is big enough to embrace science and then go beyond to what science cannot answer. So those more attractive, lesser gods, what is that for you? Where do we put our focus? Where do we put our energy? Is it science? Is it in things that we can prove? Is it financial? We need to get beyond that. What questions can those things not answer for you? We all want meaning in our life. Richard Rohr wrote the foreword for this book, and he said that the soul needs meaning like the body needs food. We all want meaning. So what questions can't science or money or whatever it is, you fill in the blank, can't answer for you? Where do you get your meaning? There was a man, his name was Antony Flew, and in 1950, he had a publication that he put out. He was from England, and he taught at Oxford University, and he was a proclaimed atheist. And his publication, I think it was Theology and Falsification, became the most famous atheist publication of the 20th century. He was well known for being an atheist, believing that science was all there was and nothing else was true to him. In 2004, he shocked the community and said he changed his mind. That he believed in God now. A lot of people thought, well, he's getting older and now he's trying to have something to hang on to. But he said he still didn't believe in life after death, but he believed in God. There were just too many things that science cannot answer, too many questions that science could not answer, and he believed in God. It was quite a shift for him. Is your God big enough? Is your God beyond what you can answer? Because God is there in the question. It's okay to be in the unknowing. God is that big that it should be, could be, beyond that which anything we know, beyond which we can put words to, beyond what we can comprehend. Is your God big enough? Is your God close enough? Let's go to the next one. A God who is relatable is crucial to us as communal creatures. If your God is not close enough, then that God will not be profoundly transforming in your life. We're community creatures. We're communal creatures. We need at least one person in our life to survive. We have this need to feel like we belong. It's an essential need to us. Without a God that is close enough, without a God that we can relate to, without a God that we can call friend, we can feel lonely, we can feel isolated. We need a God close enough. But are we making room for that God in our lives? A few weeks ago, I was going for a run, and I run on this path that's gravel, and I usually run in the middle. It's not very wide, and I run in the middle of it. And I heard very clearly behind me, on your left, meaning somebody wanted to pass me on the left. So I moved over to the right, and I kept running, and I'm waiting, like, where is this person? They're not coming. I thought, well, maybe it was a bike, but I'm like, so I stayed on the right, and then I finally just turned around. There was nobody there. Nobody there. And I realized it was, am I making room for someone else? Am I making room for a God to be close enough? Am I allowing someone to be next to me? A God to be next to me? To talk to pray to. We often say in unity to pray as, to come from that place, but it's important that we also pray too. When we have bad news, when we're in crisis, when we have a bad diagnosis or some kind of challenge in our lives, we need a God that has arms. Having a God that is principle just doesn't cut it. And so it's okay to have a God that is close enough, that is a friend enough. In that same Pew research, they asked, do you talk to God? 75% of the people said yes, they talk to God. And only 28% of them said that God answered them. Now, I wonder if God is not answering them, or they are just so tuned out to what the answer could be. Because remember, God answers in the quiet. In the quiet. Sometimes our ego is shouting so loudly to us, we can't hear what the quiet is. So is your God close enough? And then is your God you enough? This is the perspective of God that in unity, we just embrace this. Next quote, Susan. Okay. If we are divine creatures made in the image of God, then we must know that all the richness and depth of ultimate reality is deep within us. Knowing our deepest eternal self is crucial as evolving human beings. Most of you resonate with that. It's a really strong unity teaching, but you'd probably be surprised to know that we, in unity teaching, in the revealing word, which is one of unity's metaphysical dictionaries, Charles Fillmore talks about God in all of these perspectives. He doesn't use the same language, but God is relatable. God is, we can reflect about God, we can relate to God, and we can behave and act as God. And so this is the you enough God. Jesus modeled this beautifully for us in all of his I am statements in the Bible. I am the light of the world. Is your God you enough? Are you able to come from that inner place? Now, the biggest angst with all of this is we don't know. When it comes to God, we don't know anything. We can have moments of feeling and attunement to it, but we don't know. We have a lot of beliefs, and we stay very strongly in our beliefs, but we don't know. And that can be challenging for us human beings that want to know and want to have the answers, and by golly, it better be the way we think it is too. So is your God big enough, close enough, and you enough? Where is God for you right now? probably resonate with one of these more than the others. Are you willing to be open enough to take on different perspectives? Are you willing to look at a perspective of God that may not resonate with you and allow it in and work with that? It can be challenging. But we're invited in to have this integral approach to spirit, this integral approach to God. Paul Smith suggests that we close this chapter and many of the chapters in the book with he called it devotion in motion. You know how many of us do the sign of the cross, or did the sign of the cross in the Catholic Church? Well, that's a devotion in motion. So we're going to do this devotion in motion. If you bring up the slides and we're going to say some affirmations. So the first one, and all you kinesthetic learners will like this. You can use your body, and we can hold our hands out, and we'll say this first sentence together. God beyond us, in whom we live and move and have our being. Then, God beside us. God beside us, you are always with us. And the third one is like this. God being us, we are the light of the world. So I invite you to ask yourself where you are. Where is God for you? And is there a perspective of God that you may want to expand, that you may want to come into greater awareness of in order to have this integral approach to God? Namaste.